Welcome back, everybody. This is Rodrigo Fonador with Asheville Real Estate News, and bringing you another episode here. And as you guys can see, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to have a little bit more focus on creating better quality audio. And so we got some new mics, a new setup here. And the other thing that we're doing starting moving forward is Nolan's going to always have a mic. So he's not necessarily going to be on camera, but he might be jumping in, sharing his thoughts, asking a question, and just having a little bit more interaction there. So today, this episode, as you all know, is brought to you by American IRA. They're your local IRA custodian here in Asheville. If you haven't checked them out, I'd encourage you to do so. And what we're talking about today is we're talking about just an investing story, why real estate, and why somebody would decide to pursue that outside of a good career, and what was the motivations behind that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you all to Kierna Mason.
Thank you.
Did I get your name right, by the way? Okay, good.
Thank you. I didn't know if you were like practicing before, like, gotta get it right.
I practiced a few times, and then I realized it's like, I don't know if I've seen your last name just like on email correspondence a couple of times, and I was like, I think that's right. I kind of just went for it. So.
Yeah, well, you nailed it. Awesome. I'm happy to be here. Thank
Cool.
you again for inviting me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we met at the meetup, I don't know, it feels like a year ago, probably wasn't that long since, but give or take, and your focus is working there in Johnson City, right?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and kind of how you got the real estate bug.
Sure. Well, so I think what you started off with was really great. Someone who's looking to do real estate outside of, being able to fully function in my profession now. I actually moved to what we call the Tri-Cities area in Tennessee, which is Johnson City, Kingsport, Bristol, about 3 years ago now, out of college. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and graduated from college. I got a job opportunity as a chemical engineer at a nuclear plant. So real estate was never my
ticket
focus.
To freedom, per se, right?
Not at all. Honestly, I wasn't really familiar with real estate whatsoever. And so how it really all came about was through my dad. Mm-hmm. And my friends and I, during spring break, we would commonly go to Gatlinburg and rent out a cabin or Airbnb a cabin. Mm-hmm. And I just brought it up to my dad. I said, I think it'd be really awesome if, like, you or my mom bought a cabin.
Then we could rent it from you.
So I could have a cabin to go to whenever, because we loved kind of having that getaway, like a vacation home. And he actually insisted on me looking into real estate. He's like, you can get your own, just as if you're buying a house, use it when you want, and then when you're not, rent it out to other people. And this was, at the time, Airbnb was getting really popular.
So how long ago was this?
This was in 2014, 15. Okay. So it was several years ago. But at the time, my focus, again, was just not on real estate. So it took me a couple of years before I actually followed through with his suggestion. Mm-hmm. But I always told him, I said, yeah, I'll buy a cabin eventually. Like, totally want to do that. And, again, did not think real estate. Mm-hmm. Fast forward a couple years, I'm out of college now. I've been working for about a year or so full time, kind of been a little irresponsible with my finances, and now I was ready to get serious. Yeah.
Well, what happened there? Like, obviously, if you're a chemical engineer, right, is that you got a good job. It's probably pretty stable. I'm making a couple of assumptions here, but it's not like, I got into real estate. I was like, I need to do something to, like, make a huge change in my life. You probably didn't need to go for a huge change, it sounds like, because you're not planning on leaving your job, are you?
No, I'm not.
Right.
I love being an engineer, so I plan to continue being in that field.
So what was it that was like, okay, like, what happened to be, okay, I need to look at something outside of my job for some additional stability or financial planning for the future or whatnot?
It was a couple things. The first one was I wanted to have something that I owned. Mm-hmm. And what that meant originally was just something for, I've got 4 siblings. Mm-hmm. literally like vacation home, and that's not something that neither one of my parents had as I grew up as a child. And I've always wanted to have that because we love taking trips and family vacations. And so I just wanted a way to be able to have our own without having to rent through someone else. Because when I saw the Airbnb process, I said, it just looks like regular people are doing this. That's where it started. And that's when I started doing the research. I'm a researcher by nature.
Well, I imagine.
So when I started doing the research, then I heard other people who are in real estate investing talk about how you can do this thing called being financially free. That was something I was not familiar with at all. The process of being able to use investing that's not stocks or bonds or something like that, to be able to have flexibility in your finances. And that, when I heard that I could be flexible, then I really got into real estate, because though I love engineering, being in a 9-to-5 every day didn't sound as appealing. I'd rather have an opportunity to do engineering how I want, on the schedule that I want, and still know that I have some stability financially through another method.
So how long have you been going all in, relatively speaking? You know, how long have you been intentional about pursuing real estate on the side?
I'd say I'm definitely a newbie for sure. So like less than a year, seriously focused on it. And so I really got started, I'd say last summer, of attending meetups, listening to podcasts, reading. That's when I really started doing major research. And a few months later, I bought my first home in Johnson City in October.
As an Airbnb, or is it a long-term rental?
As a long-term rental. I expanded outside of the Airbnb realm because I just educated myself and I learned there's other avenues. You know, knowing about Airbnb is how I got into
So that was the tip of the iceberg for you.
Yeah, that was how I got into it. But then after I started educating myself, I learned that there's so many other things that I can do. And, you know, it just started to just make sense after reading, after listening. I was like, this makes so much more sense than it seems like it does when you don't know.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, though, as far as information, because there's so much out there. And I know when I first started, I had like shiny penny syndrome. I'd read like a new book or hear about a new thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to do that, do this, do that. And, you know, it's just very distracting. Curious to know, do you remember what any of those first books that you read to kind of get you started or to get you on the right path?
Two books that were my first one. One is by a writer named Aren, and it's called Miracle Morning. That and it was like how to become a millionaire, basically. The reason that one appealed to me is because it talked about having a structure. What are some key things that you can do to get your day started, to get on the right track? Now, all the steps in the book, when you read the books, there's a whole thing, he calls them savers, that you go through in the morning. Due to my work schedule, it's hard for me to be able to get it all in because I go into work at 6:30, 7. So I'd be waking up at 3 a.m.
Yeah, well, great. I love the book too, actually. It's a good read, isn't it? Yeah. So that was one. What was the second one then? And
then Rich Dad Poor Dad. I felt like that was a quintessential way to get started. I mean, I also heard it tossed around so much. I don't think I listened to about 2 or 3 podcasts very regularly in the beginning, and there was always a guest that mentioned that book. So I said, I gotta just get it. What was the deal?
Yeah, that book was huge for me as well. I read it a couple of times.
Mind opening.
Yeah, it
changed the game for me too. Yeah.
So what's your focus now, and how do you feel, you know, with where you're at and kind of what you learned over the past year and whatnot? How do you see things progressing for you in the future?
I think I'm definitely still in the development phase, just because I'm still very fresh in it. At this point in time, I'm taking a more conservative approach by just focusing on one area, and that's primarily buy and hold for 1 to 4 unit or single-family residence specifically, because we don't have a wonderful multifamily market in Johnson City in the area that I'm looking at. We do have some, but it's easier to find a 2-bedroom home, 3-bedroom home, and I'm focusing on that just to get the process of building up having rental income and kind of using what is called the stack method of just acquiring a little bit at a time. You know, first year, get a certain number, second year, double that number, and just kind of gradually increase. And I'm just seeing where that takes me. When you're not able to go in 100% and focus all of your time on just real estate, I think you have to be a little bit more strategic and selective about what you're doing, because you can't do it all. You know, I have a 9 to 5 that I have to focus on primarily because that's what's bringing in my income right now. So with my spare time doing investing, I'm really trying to just gradually get into it and learn along the way.
I think even if you're doing it full time, there's something to be said about having a primary area of focus that kind of allows you to experiment or look into other things as well, for sure. With the rentals, you said you wanted to get in because you wanted to have that concept of like owning something, right? What was it like when you got that first house? Was there like commemorative experience? Did you go walk through it? You have it rented out now. Is it hard to kind of like let it go, or are you just pretty at peace with the whole process?
It was, I guess I didn't really realize what it meant. You know, I'm 25. Okay. So when I bought the house, I guess I didn't realize the process of what it takes to buy a house and how much you can kind of go through. The way I went into it is because, again, I'm a recent college grad, so I don't have a huge amount in savings, but I did have a stable income and a good credit score. So I just used the things that I had to my advantage. And I bought the home to live in, and basically it's kind of living into it, and then that's how I was able to acquire the home and then rent it out. Making it my primary residence at first. Okay. So I walked through it. I did the things that I thought you should do when buying a home, but again, I was still very green to the whole thing. But closing was pretty simple, and I think what helped with that is that I got a team of people to really help. I did my research on a good realtor. When you're in a place like Johnson City, you get that small town effect. So my realtor went to high school with my friends, and I didn't even know it. We just found out. So you're able to get connections easily sometimes. And I got a good person to help us close, and I got a good realtor, and I have friends who do construction, and they helped me. So I just used a team of people to really help me make a sound decision. And we were able to close fairly easy, and I was like, wow, so this is what it takes to buy a house. Okay.
I'll do that again.
I'll do that again. It was like 30-minute closing.
Nice.
And I don't know, it just seemed so straightforward, and it just made sense. So
are you renting now, or do you own where you live?
I currently own where I live, but I have a renter lined up for when I move out. I have to move out when I'm getting ready to transition. So when I'm at the point where I'm transitioning out of the house, the renter will move in. Space. So I went ahead and identified the renter, got those things already, so we could just kind of have as smooth a transition as possible.
And then rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah, and keep doing it. And so now that's really where I'm at on continuing to look for more opportunities like that. And I try to stay in a neighborhood that I know very well, which is, right near the downtown area for us.
So I'm curious about something. All right, like obviously you got a good thing going on in Johnson City. You got a good team of people, good network there. That's where you live. That's where you work. But we met here in Asheville. I mean, it's not far away, but it's not really close either. So what, like an hour-ish?
Yeah.
Why were you in Asheville? Like, I mean, I know you were at the meetup, or I don't know if that's the only reason why you came, but what happened for you to be like, I need to expand my circle, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's like, how'd you end up here? Being from Nashville, and I'm trying not to mix those two things up.
All the time, right?
Being from Nashville, Tennessee, and seeing that market, and I'm sure as you guys know, and many people know, the real estate market in Nashville is a total beast, very different. But after I learned a little bit about real estate, I started to look at bigger markets. And what I noticed is sometimes what you get in these big markets is that it can be a lot for investors, and it can be difficult. I mean, it's possible to get in, and once you get in, it could be a really good thing. But what's difficult sometimes is for investors to find properties at prices that can make sense, because the market is just so hot. It costs a lot of money to buy in big cities that are thriving.
Yeah.
So we say in Johnson City that sometimes we call ourselves the little Asheville, because what we get is a lot of spillage from Asheville in Johnson City, whether that's people or just concepts. The whole brewery scene that's really emerging out of Johnson City, I think, was in part motivated by what's happening here in Asheville. So we have our own scene that is not quite Asheville, but also very stable. So I just got the idea that it's just an hour away. There may be people who are looking at different markets because Asheville may be too competitive, or it may be easier to get in a market that has cheaper houses, but very stable. So I really came up with the concept of finding a meetup in Asheville and advertising to Asheville investors about the Johnson City market, to have them just think about potentially investing in a market that's not far, that's stable, but the prices are very different, and the speed of acquiring a home, selling a home, all those things are very different. And so I try to talk to people in Asheville about the Johnson City market to try to appeal in that way.
Well, on that note, if anybody is curious about talking to you about the Johnson City market, what's the best way for somebody to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm definitely active on Bigger Pockets. If you're an investor on that, my name is Kierna, K-I-E-R-N-A, last name Mason. Or you can just email me. I'm very responsive in my email, and that's Kierna, K-I-E-R-N-A, cmason@gmail.com. And I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. I've had a couple people come down to Johnson City and just kind of do a quick tour, and I've connected them with my realtor, and we've talked about ways that we can partner while they're here in Asheville, but I'm in Johnson City and doing a potential partnership there.
That's awesome. I know I've talked to a bunch of people, and like, as I mentioned, you have a friend who's interested in Johnson City, and it's not the only time. I think it's a semi-common conversation that I've heard a little bit, like, Johnson City's interesting. It's not that far away. It's worth looking into. As we wrap things up, just curious if there's anything that you're working on specifically that you're really excited about, or anything that's coming up that, that you're just aware of personally, that you're just like, man, I'm really excited about that this year for XYZ reason.
Yeah, I'm excited in general about our Tri-Cities meetup. We're really expanding. We have a meetup that takes place in Kingsport, which is 20 minutes from Johnson City, and the numbers have grown since I've even gone. We have a wonderful person that leads that. Her name is Connie, and she's been very consistent. So I'm excited to see it expand. And I've also recently joined a third meetup now in Johnson City that focuses just on multifamily properties.
Very cool.
So, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of hard to find, good multifamilies that you can do that BRRRR method that people like to talk about. So to the point that we now have 3 different real estate investing type of meetup groups in our area is really exciting. So I'm excited about that, and just seeing and connecting with more investors in the area. And I'm always excited to hear that people not in Tennessee are curious about Tennessee. We recently had somebody from New York come down, and he's a big investor. It's like, I heard about the Tri-Cities market, so that's always exciting to hear that we're growing.
Very cool, very cool. Do you mind just explaining what the BRRRR method is for anybody who might not know?
Sure. So BRRRR, let me not get this wrong. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. The repeat I know is last, and I know the buy is first. The R's in the middle could interchange, but
as long as you can say it properly, right? BRRRR.
BRRRR, yes, with multiple R's. Basically, you are buying a property, and you are fixing it up and bringing up the value. So then you can refinance and pull money out from that refinance, and then keeping it as a rental property, and the money that you pull out from the refinance can go towards funding a flip, funding another BRRRR property, and just repeating that process. So it's a great way to buy low, add value to the home, and then take your cash out to go towards doing that all over again.
Awesome. And question, are you going to be at our next meetup on April 10th?
Yes.
So if somebody wants to connect with you in person, they could do so then?
Most definitely. I will be there, and I would love to speak to anyone who's interested in talking more about my story or just the Tri-Cities in general.
Word. Awesome. Well, Kierna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hope you have a great weekend. This is Friday afternoon for whatever that's worth. All right, guys. Well, there you go. If you have any questions, if you want to reach out to Kierna, contact information will be here below on the show notes and whatnot. And again, hope to see everybody at our meetup, whether it's in April, May, June, July, etc. We look forward to meeting you. All right, everybody. Have a great week, and see you next week.